Why did you leave me here? The whisper started on the third night, but I didn't truly hear it until the fifth. Looking back, I think part of me knew something was wrong from the moment I signed the lease, the way Mr. Garrett's hand trembled as he handed me the keys, the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes when I asked about the previous tenant, the way he said good luck instead of welcome when I took possession of apartment 2A. But I was desperate. 2 months behind on student loans, living out of my car for 3 weeks, surviving on gas station sandwiches and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes rational thought impossible. When you're that far gone, you don't question a miracle. You just take it and pray it holds. The house on Ashwood Lane was a relic from another century. 3 stories of Victorian architecture, slowly surrendering to time and neglect. The exterior paint had long since given up its original color, fading to a uniform gray-green that matched the moss growing on the north-facing walls. Inside wasn't much better. The common areas smelled of mildew and old cooking oil, and the carpets in the hallways were worn down to the backing in places. But my unit, 2A on the second floor, wasn't terrible. A studio apartment with high ceilings, tall windows that rattled in their frames, and enough space for a bed, a small table, and not much else. The bathroom was claustrophobic, barely large enough to turn around in. The kitchenette consisted of a hot plate, a mini-fridge that hummed like it was struggling to breathe, and a sink with a permanent rust stain. But it was mine. For $400 a month, utilities included, it was mine. The strange thing was the wall. It ran the entire length of the room, parallel to the windows, dividing what had clearly once been a larger space. The plaster on this wall was different from the rest, smoother, newer, a shade of cream that didn't quite match the yellowed walls around it. When I knocked on it, the sound was hollow, empty. Renovations, Mr. Garrett had said when I'd asked about it during the walkthrough. Previous owner subdivided the units, more apartments, more income. You know how it is. I'd nodded, thinking nothing of it at the time. But now, standing alone in my new home, with my meager possessions still in garbage bags by the door, I found myself staring at that wall. Something about it felt wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just subtly, persistently off, like a picture frame hanging slightly crooked. On the other side of that wall was apartment 2B. I'd tried knocking on their door my first day, planning to introduce myself, but no one had answered. The door itself looked odd. The brass number was tarnished, almost black, and the wood around the doorknob was filmed with dust. Not the kind of dust that accumulates over days or weeks, but the kind that settles over months, years maybe. The first 2 nights passed in a haze of unpacking and exhaustion. I slept hard, the kind of dreamless sleep that comes from pushing your body past its limits. The house made its noises around me, creaking floorboards, groaning pipes, the whistle of wind finding gaps in the ancient window frames, but I barely registered them. It was the 3rd night when I first heard the voice. I'd been lying in bed, scrolling through job listings on my phone, when I became aware of a sound. Faint, rhythmic, coming from somewhere close by. At first I thought it was the wind, or maybe someone's television playing too loudly. But as I lowered my phone and listened more carefully, I realized it was coming from the other side of the wall. A voice, murmuring, rising and falling like a prayer or a lullaby. I sat up, frowning. So my neighbor was home, after all. I'd been starting to think the apartment was vacant, given the lack of response to my knocking. But here they are, talking to themselves in the middle of the night? The murmuring continued for another minute and then stopped abruptly. I waited, listening, but heard nothing more. Eventually, I shrugged it off and went back to my phone. The fourth night, I heard it again. This time I was closer to sleep when the sound started, that twilight state where reality blurs and the mind plays tricks. The voice was clearer this time, more insistent, and though I couldn't make out individual words, there was an urgency to it, a pleading quality that made my chest tighten with nameless anxiety. I pressed my ear against the wall, trying to understand what was being said. The plaster was cold against my skin, and I could feel vibrations, faint but definitely there. Someone was speaking on the other side of the wall, speaking directly into the wall just as I was listening through it. And then, for just a moment, the words became clear. "Left me here." I pulled back, my heart suddenly racing. The voice fell silent again, leaving only the familiar creaks and groans of the old house and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I told myself I'd imagined it, that I was overtired, stressed, my mind playing tricks in that half-asleep state. I went back to bed and eventually drifted off, though my sleep was troubled by dreams I couldn't quite remember upon waking. The fifth night was when everything changed. I'd been awake this time, fully, completely awake, sitting at my small table, eating microwaved ramen and reading a book I'd picked up at the thrift store. It was just past midnight when the voice started, and this time there was no ambiguity, no room for doubt or rationalization. "Why did you leave me here?" The words were crystal clear, close, spoken in a voice that was neither male nor female, neither young nor old, just empty, hollow, echoing with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the warmth out of the room. I froze, the noodle sliding off my fork and back into the cup. The voice was coming from the wall, from inside the wall, impossible as that seemed. Not from apartment 2B, from the wall itself. "Why did you leave me here?" It repeated the phrase exactly the same way, same inflection, same devastating sadness, like a recording playing on a loop. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. My hands were shaking as I approached the wall. This close, I could feel the cold radiating from it. The temperature difference was striking. The rest of the room was stuffy and warm from the space heater. But here, near the wall, the air was frigid. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The response came immediately. "Why did you leave me here?" Same words, same tone, but this time I heard something underneath it, a wetness, like someone speaking through tears or through a mouthful of water. I pressed my hand against the wall. The plaster was ice cold, and for a moment I could have sworn I felt something on the other side, a presence, a weight, pressing back against my palm, matching my hand exactly. I jerked away, stumbling backward until I hit the opposite wall. My breath was coming in short gasps, and I could feel panic rising in my chest like floodwater. "This isn't real," I said aloud, needing to hear my own voice. "This isn't real. You're stressed. You're exhausted. You're hearing things." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Whatever was on the other side of that wall, it was real, and it knew I was there. It was talking to me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner farthest from the wall, my phone clutched in my hand, waiting for the voice to come again. It didn't, but I could feel it there, on the other side, waiting, watching. When dawn finally broke, painting my windows with weak gray light, I had made a decision. I needed to know what was on the other side of that wall. I needed to see inside apartment 2B. The hallway was empty when I emerged from my apartment that morning. I stood in front of the door to 2B, staring at it like it might reveal its secrets through sheer force of will. The brass number was even more tarnished than I had remembered. The dust on the doorknob was thick enough that I could see my reflection in the cleaner spots where I had touched it before. I knocked. 3 solid raps that echoed through the empty hallway. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. "Hello? Is anyone home?" Nothing. But as I stood there, listening, I became aware of a smell, faint but distinct, seeping from under the door. Mildew, stale air, and underneath that, something organic and unpleasant, like vegetables left too long in the back of a refrigerator. "No one's lived there in a long time." I spun around. An elderly woman stood in the doorway to 2C, the unit on my other side. She was small and thin, with silver hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her skin. Her eyes were a watery blue, and they studied me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I'm sorry?" I said. "That apartment," she nodded toward 2B. "Empty. Has been since I moved in." "When was that?" "Last April, 14 months ago." She tilted her head, still watching me with those unsettling eyes. "Why do you ask?" "I keep hearing noises. From that side. I thought someone might be living there." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or concern. "What kind of noises?" "Voices. Someone talking. Last night they said—" I trailed off, suddenly aware how insane this sounded. The woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she stepped fully into the hallway, closing her door behind her. She moved closer, and I caught a whiff of her perfume, something floral and old-fashioned. "Listen to me carefully," she said, her voice low. "I've lived in this building for a year. In that time, I've seen 7 people move into your apartment. 7. None of them lasted more than 2 months. Most left in the middle of the night. No notice, no forwarding address. Just gone." My mouth dried. "Why?" "Because of what's in the wall." She glanced at the door to 2B, then back at me. "I don't know what it is. I've never been brave enough to find out. But whatever it is, it doesn't like being ignored. And it especially doesn't like being left alone." I struggled to find words. "That's insane. You're talking about this like it's real, like there's actually something—" "I know how it sounds," she cut me off, her voice sharp. "I know, but I also know what I've heard. The crying, the begging, the scratching. And I know that everyone who's lived in 2A has heard it too. Most of them don't make it a month before they run. The fact that you lasted 5 days before knocking on that door," she shook her head, "that's longer than most." She turned and went back into her apartment, pausing at the threshold. "My advice is leave, now, tonight. Don't wait to see what happens next. Just go." The door closed, and I was alone in the hallway again, staring at the door to 2B. I should have listened to her. God knows I should have listened to her. But instead, I went downstairs and called the landlord. Mr. Garrett didn't answer his phone. I left 3 messages over the course of the day, each one more insistent than the last. I explained that I needed access to 2B, that I was concerned about a possible rodent infestation in the walls, that it was affecting my ability to sleep and work. He never called back. By evening, I was exhausted and frustrated. I'd spent the day trying to distract myself. Job applications, cleaning the apartment, a walk around the neighborhood. But my mind kept returning to that wall, to the voice, to the impossible cold and that pressing sensation, like something trying to push through from the other side. I ate dinner mechanically, barely tasting the food. As the sun set and darkness filled my apartment, I felt my anxiety rising. Night was coming, and with it I knew the voice would return. I wasn't wrong. It started at 11:47 p.m. I know because I was watching the clock on my phone, dreading the approach of midnight. Why did you leave me here? The voice was louder tonight, clearer, and there was a new quality to it, an edge of accusation, like whoever was speaking wasn't just sad anymore. They were angry. I was ready this time. I'd positioned myself near the wall, my phone recording, determined to capture evidence of what I was hearing, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. "Who are you?" I called out. "What do you want?" "Why did you leave me here?" Same words, but the tone had shifted. There was more force behind it now, more emotion. It sounded like someone who'd been crying for hours, their voice raw and broken. "I didn't leave you anywhere," I said, feeling foolish, talking to a wall, but unable to stop myself. "I just moved in. I don't even know who you are." Silence. For a moment I thought that was it, that the voice would retreat like it had the previous nights. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Not from apartment 2B, not from the hallway, from inside the wall. Slow, deliberate footsteps, muffled by layers of plaster and wood, but unmistakable. Someone was walking back and forth in a space that shouldn't exist, a space too narrow for pacing, a space that should be part of my apartment or the neighboring one, not trapped in between. I pressed my ear against the wall, my heart hammering. The footsteps continued, and with them came other sounds, a scraping noise, like fingernails dragging across wood, a wet, labored breathing that didn't sound quite human, and underneath it all, a faint tapping. No, not tapping, counting. Someone was counting, their voice so low I could barely hear it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The counting stopped at 7, then started again, over and over. 7 counts, then silence, then 7 more. "What are you counting?" I whispered. The footsteps stopped. The breathing stopped. Everything went silent. Then, so close I could feel the words vibrate through the wall. "The ones who left me here." I stumbled backward, my phone clattering to the floor. The recording was still going, capturing the silence that followed, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was what the neighbor had said. 7 people. 7 people had lived in my apartment, and whoever was in that wall was counting them. I didn't sleep that night either, or the next night, or the one after that. By the fourth day of no sleep, I was starting to crack. The exhaustion was taking its toll. I'd catch myself zoning out mid-task, losing minutes at a time. My hands shook constantly. My appetite had vanished. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the pale, hollow-eyed person staring back at me. But I couldn't leave. Something kept me rooted to that apartment. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the simple fact that I had nowhere else to go. Or maybe, and this thought scared me more than anything else, maybe it was because whatever was in that wall didn't want me to leave. I'd started noticing things, small things at first, easy to dismiss as coincidence or paranoia, but they were accumulating, building into a pattern I couldn't ignore. My keys would move from where I'd left them. I'd find them in different rooms, on different surfaces, always just slightly out of place. The apartment was always cold now. No matter how high I turned up the heat, my breath misted in the air even during the day. And the wall was changing. The plaster seemed darker somehow, stained, like something was seeping through from the other side. On the fifth day of no sleep, I made a decision. If no one would open apartment 2B for me, I'd find another way to see what was on the other side of that wall. I waited until afternoon, when the building was mostly quiet. Then I took a butter knife from my drawer and started working on the wall where it met the baseboard. The gap there had been bothering me since the first night, that half-inch space where the plaster didn't quite reach the floor. The plaster was softer than I expected, crumbling easily under the pressure of the knife. I scraped away at it, widening the gap, revealing more of the hollow space behind. The smell hit me immediately. That organic rot I'd noticed under the door to 2B, but much stronger now. I gagged, covering my mouth with my shirt, but I kept working. I had to see, had to know. The gap was now about 3 inches wide. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it into the darkness. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The beam caught on something pale and curved, wood maybe, or plaster. But as my eyes adjusted, the shape resolved into something that made my stomach drop. A wall. There was another wall, maybe 2 feet beyond the first, creating a space. A narrow corridor of empty air just wide enough for a person to stand in if they turned sideways. But that didn't make sense. Why would anyone build 2 walls so close together? Why create a space too narrow to use, too shallow for a room? Unless it wasn't meant to be empty. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The flashlight beam went wild, creating jumping shadows that made the walls seem to breathe. When I finally retrieved it and looked again, the gap showed nothing but empty darkness. But I knew what I'd seen, or thought I had seen. A shape, a silhouette, standing in that impossible space, pressed against the inner wall, watching me through the gap I'd created. I sealed the hole with duct tape, my fingers fumbling with the roll. It wasn't a real fix, but it made me feel better, like I'd closed a door, like I'd put a barrier between myself and whatever was in there.
That night, the voice came earlier than usual. Just after sunset, while there was still a faint glow of light in the sky. Why did you leave me here? But this time, it wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from my bathroom. I stood frozen in the center of my apartment, staring at the bathroom door. It was closed. I always kept it closed, some childhood habit I'd never broken. But now, from the other side, I could hear that voice, speaking in the dark, asking its eternal question, "Why did you leave me here?" Slowly, mechanically, I walked to the door. My hand closed around the knob. It was ice cold. I turned it. The door swung open. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror showed someone standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing there. Just my empty apartment, shadows lengthening in the dying light. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there, standing right behind my reflection, close enough that I should be able to feel their breath on my neck. They looked like me. Same height, same build, same basic features, but their face was all wrong, sunken, gray, with eyes that were too dark and too deep, like looking into wells. And they were mouthing words, moving their lips in the mirror, speaking without sound. "Why did you leave me here?" I ran, out of the bathroom, out of the apartment, down the stairs and into the street. I didn't stop until I was 3 blocks away, doubled over on a sidewalk, dry heaving into a storm drain. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but some automatic response made my hand move, lifting it to my ear. "You can't run from this." The voice was my voice, my exact voice. "You can't run from yourself." I hung up and blocked the number. Then I sat on that sidewalk until the streetlights came on, trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't go back to the apartment, but I had nowhere else to go. No money for a hotel, no friends close enough to crash with, just the clothes on my back and a phone with 15% battery. Eventually, inevitably, I went back, because that's what always happens, isn't it? We go back to the places that hurt us, the situations that trap us, because at least they're familiar, at least they're known. The apartment was dark when I returned. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. The power was out, or had been cut, or maybe had never been on at all. Maybe I'd been living in darkness this whole time and only just now realized it. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate to my bed. The beam caught on something as I passed the wall. The duct tape had been removed. The gap I'd sealed was open again, wider than before, and from that gap I could see light, a faint, sickly green glow, pulsing like a heartbeat. Something was in there, in that impossible space, and it was awake. "Why did you leave me here?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls and the floor and the ceiling, from inside my own head. I closed my eyes and lay down on my bed, curling into a ball. "I don't know," I whispered to the darkness. "I don't know what you want from me." The only answer was silence, and the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth in the walls around me, counting, always counting. I must have slept eventually, though I don't remember falling asleep. What I do remember was the dream. I was standing in a room I didn't recognize,
Small, narrow, with walls so close I could touch both of them if I stretched out my arms. The only light came from a crack at the bottom of one wall, a strip of brightness that seemed impossibly bright after so much darkness. I tried to move toward it, but my feet wouldn't obey. I was stuck, rooted to the spot like I had been there so long I'd become part of the floor. And then I heard it. Voices, plural, all speaking at once, their words overlapping into a cacophony of despair. Why did you leave me here? How could you forget me? I waited so long. Please come back. Don't leave me again. 7 voices, speaking in 7 different tones, but all of them sounded like me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my body wouldn't move. All I could do was stand there and listen as the voices grew louder, more desperate, more angry. And then, one by one, they started to go silent. The first voice faded mid-sentence, like someone had turned down its volume until it disappeared completely. Then the second, then the third. By the time the 7th voice went silent, I was alone in the dark. And I knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason, that I was next. That I would stand here, in this narrow space, calling out to the next person who came, asking them why they left me, begging them to remember, counting the days and weeks and years until my voice joined the others in fading away. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat despite the cold. The apartment was still dark, my phone was dead, I'd forgotten to charge it. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the floor. And in those shadows I saw movement. Someone was standing by the wall. Same height as me, same build, wearing the same clothes I'd gone to sleep in. They turned to look at me, and even in the darkness I could see their face. It was my face, but wrong, like a photograph that had been left in the sun too long, the features faded and distorted. They smiled, and when they spoke, their voice was mine. You're starting to understand, aren't you? I couldn't move, couldn't speak, only watch as my doppelganger walked closer, each step perfectly silent. We're the same, they said. We've always been the same. Different iterations, different times, but the same person, making the same choices, ending up in the same place. They sat on the edge of my bed. I could feel the mattress compress under their weight, could smell them, that organic rot, that mildew and decay. The house needs 7, they continued. 7 to complete the cycle, 7 to make the pattern whole, and then one more. 1 to start it all again. I don't understand, I managed to whisper. You will. When it's your turn in the wall, you'll understand everything. They reached out and touched my face. Their hand was ice cold and slightly damp. But that's not tonight. Tonight, you still have work to do. What work? They smiled again. Investigation, discovery, all the things that lead you back here. all the things that make the pattern complete. They stood and walked back to the wall, but instead of stopping at it, they kept walking into it, through it, disappearing into the plaster like it was water. And their voice drifted back, already fading. See you soon. I left as soon as there was enough light, grabbed my jacket and walked out without looking back, without locking the door, without any plan beyond getting as far from that apartment as possible. The public library opened at 9. I was waiting at the doors when the librarian arrived, and I was at the computer terminals before she'd even turned on all the lights. I searched for everything I could find about 1847 Ashwood Lane. Property records, historical documents, newspaper archives, anything that might explain what was happening to me. The house had been built in 1887 by a merchant named Thomas Whitmore. He lived there with his family for 15 years before selling it and moving west. After that, it had changed hands several times, each owner keeping it for only a few years before selling to the next. In 1972, it had been converted into apartments by a man named Robert Garrett. That name made me pause. Garrett. Same last name as my current landlord. I dug deeper. Robert Garrett had owned the property until his death in 2003. His son, Martin Garrett, had inherited it, and Martin's son, first name Edgar, was my current landlord. 3 generations of Garretts, all managing the same property, and during that entire time, according to the records I could find, there had been a steady stream of tenants, most staying only a few months before moving out, many leaving with no forwarding address. But the real discovery came when I found the newspaper articles. The first was from 1989. Human remains found in Ashwood Lane property. Police are investigating after construction workers discovered human remains sealed behind a false wall in an apartment at 1847 Ashwood Lane. The remains have been identified as David Whitmore, 23, who was reported missing in 1987. Whitmore had been renting apartment 2A at the time of his disappearance. The article continued, but my eyes had caught on to 2 details: David Whitmore and apartment 2A. I searched for more articles, found them, too many of them. 1994, missing person report for Jennifer Holloway, last seen at her residence on Ashwood Lane. 2001, Michael Reeves, 22, disappeared from his apartment on Ashwood Lane. Personal belongings found undisturbed. 2008, Sarah Chen reported missing. Last known address, 1847 Ashwood Lane, apartment 2A. 2015, another disappearance, Thomas Wright, same apartment. 2019, Alexandra Novak, 2A again. 2022, James Morrison. 7 people, 7 disappearances, all from the same apartment. And as I stared at the screen, reading name after name, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The accompanying photos. Some were grainy, copied from old newspapers. Others were clearer, taken from social media or driver's licenses. But they all showed the same thing. 7 different faces, all with the same basic features, the same build, the same hollow look in their eyes. We could have been siblings, or the same person at different ages. I pulled up the article about David Whitmore again and zoomed in on his photo. Really looked at it this time. He looked exactly like me. My hand started shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. I clicked through the other articles, comparing faces. Jennifer Holloway, same cheekbones as me. Michael Reeves, same nose. Sarah Chen, she could have been my sister. We were all the same, different names, different years, but the same person, over and over. The pattern. I printed every article I could find and stuffed them in my jacket. Then I left the library and started walking. I had no destination in mind. I just needed to move, to think, to process what I'd learned. That's when I noticed him. A man standing across the street, same height as me, same build, wearing similar clothes. He was too far away to see his face clearly, but something about his posture was familiar. He raised his hand, waved at me. I turned and walked faster. When I glanced back, he was following me. Not running, just walking at the same pace, maintaining the distance between us. I ducked into a coffee shop, ordered something I didn't want, and sat in the back corner where I could watch the door. The man didn't come in, but I could see him through the window, standing on the sidewalk, waiting. I stayed in that coffee shop for 3 hours. The man never left. He just stood there, patient as stone, occasionally checking his phone or adjusting his jacket, but always watching the door. Finally, the barista came over and gently suggested that I either order something else or make room for other customers. I ordered another coffee I wouldn't drink, but the message was clear. I couldn't hide here forever. I left through the back exit into an alley that smelled of garbage and stale beer. Halfway down, I glanced back. He was there, at the end of the alley. He hadn't followed me out. He'd somehow known where I would go, been waiting for me. I ran, straight through the alley, across a street, down another block. My breath burned in my chest, and the newspaper articles crinkled in my jacket with every step. When I finally stopped, gasping, I was in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. Residential, quiet, the kind of place where every house looked the same and every lawn was precisely maintained. I turned around slowly, scanning the street. He was nowhere. I was alone. But as I stood there, catching my breath, I caught sight of my reflection in a parked car's window. There were two of me, one inside the car, looking out, one outside, looking in. Both versions raised their hands simultaneously. Both waved. Then the one inside the car smiled and mouthed words I could read on their lips. See you at home. I didn't go home. Not right away. Instead, I found myself at the police station, asking to speak to someone about the disappearances on Ashwood Lane. The officer at the front desk was young, barely older than me, and he looked at me with a mixture of confusion and concern as I tried to explain. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I'm not sure what you're asking. You want to file a missing person report?" "No. I want to know about the previous ones, the ones from that address. There have been 7 people who—" "Sir, I can't just give out information on old cases. If you have concerns about a current situation, I can take a report, but—" "Someone is following me," I said, the words tumbling out faster than I could control them. "Someone who looks exactly like me, and there's something in the walls of my apartment, something that keeps asking why I left it there. And 7 people have disappeared from that exact same apartment over the past 35 years, and they all look like me, and—" The officer held up a hand. "Okay, okay. Why don't you have a seat, and I'll get someone to talk to you." I sat and waited and waited. Finally, an older detective came out. She introduced herself as Detective Ramos and led me to a small room with a table and 2 chairs, the kind of room you see in TV shows with a mirror on one wall that's definitely two-way glass. She listened to my story without interrupting. When she finished, she was quiet for a long time. I'm sorry, what was your name again?" I told her. She wrote it down. "And you've been living at this address for how long?" "A week, almost 2 weeks." "And you're experiencing auditory hallucinations, seeing this doppelganger figure?" "It's not a hallucination. It's real. The newspaper articles, I have them right here." I reached for my jacket, but when I pulled out the papers, they were blank. Just empty white sheets. No text, no images, nothing. I stared at them, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. These had articles on them, about the disappearances, about David Whitmore and the others. Detective Ramos's expression shifted from professional concern to something softer. Pity, maybe. "Have you been sleeping? Eating regularly? Any history of mental health issues?" "I'm not crazy," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. The blank papers sat between us like an accusation. "I didn't say you were, but you're clearly under a lot of stress. Moving to a new place, financial troubles, these things can manifest in unexpected ways. I'd like to give you some resources, places you can call if you're feeling overwhelmed." She handed me a pamphlet. Mental health crisis hotline numbers, addresses for free counseling services. "What about the disappearances?" I asked desperately. "Can't you at least check the files? See if there's a pattern?" "I'll look into it," she said, in a tone that made it clear she wouldn't. "But in the meantime, I think you should reach out to one of these services. Talk to someone. Get some rest." I left the station with the pamphlet crumpled in my fist. The blank papers I threw in the first trash can I passed. It was getting dark. I'd been gone all day, wandering the city, and now I had nowhere to go but back. Back to Ashwood Lane. Back to apartment 2A. Back to whatever was waiting for me there. The building was quiet when I returned. No jazz music from downstairs, no sounds from the other apartments. Just silence, deep and oppressive. I climbed the stairs slowly, my legs heavy with exhaustion and dread. When I reached the second floor, I saw that the door to 2B was ajar. It had never been opened before, not once. I stood frozen, staring at that gap of darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and leave, but I'd come this far. I'd seen too much. I needed to know what was on the other side. I pushed the door open. The apartment was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no belongings, no sign anyone had ever lived there. The walls were the same yellowed cream as mine. The floors were the same scuffed hardwood. But something was wrong. The dimensions were off. The room was too small, much too small. I walked to the far wall, the wall that should have backed up against mine. And that's when I understood. There was no wall. Or rather, there was only one wall. My wall. The wall from my apartment. I could see it from this side now, see the newer plaster, the slight color difference. But there was nothing behind it, just open space where the other half of this apartment should have been. Someone had built a false wall in my apartment, cutting the room in half, creating a narrow corridor between the two walls, a space just wide enough for a person to stand in, a space to trap someone. I approached the wall carefully, running my hands over it. The plaster was cold and slightly damp, and there, near the floor, I found what I was looking for. The gap I'd opened with the butter knife. I could see through it into my apartment, see my bed, my few possessions, the light I'd left on. And I could see something else. Someone was in my apartment. They were standing in the center of the room, perfectly still, facing the wall. Facing me, though they could possibly not see me through the tiny gap. I watched them as they raised their hand and pressed it against the wall. Their palm was exactly where mine had been when I'd felt that presence pushing back. Then they spoke, and I heard their voice both through the gap and from somewhere much closer, from inside my own head. I'm tired of waiting. It's time to complete the pattern. They turned, and I saw their face properly for the first time. It was my face, exact in every detail, but there was something wrong with the eyes. They were too dark, too deep, like looking into the gap between walls, into that narrow space where things got trapped and forgotten.
I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. I needed to get out, needed to run, but as I turned toward the door, I found it closed, locked. I hadn't heard it close, but it was shut tight, the knob refusing to turn no matter how hard I twisted. "You can't leave," the voice came from behind me, my voice. "None of us could leave, and now it's your turn to understand why." I spun around. They were standing right there, close enough to touch. Up close, I could see other differences. The way their skin sagged slightly, like it was too large for their frame. The way they moved with a jerky, stop-motion quality, like frames of a film were missing. "What are you?" I whispered. "I'm you, or I was you. It's hard to remember which came first. The house does that, muddles time, folds it back on itself. But the pattern remains clear. 7 disappear into the walls, and 1 remains to draw in the next." "The neighbor said 7 people lived in my apartment." "I am those 7 people. Each one that disappeared fed the pattern, and when 7 were complete, the cycle reset. But someone has to remain. Someone has to draw in the next group. Someone has to start the count again." They moved closer, and I could smell that rot, that decay. It was my turn to wait, my turn to call from the walls, but I've been here so long, too long. I want to rest now. I want to fade like the others. "I won't do it," I said. "I won't take your place." "You have no choice. You stopped having a choice the moment you signed the lease, the moment you heard the voice, the moment you looked into the gap." They smiled, and their teeth were too white, too perfect. "You're already partly in the wall. Can't you feel it? The way the apartment pulls at you, the way you can't quite remember what life was like
before you moved in?" They were right. God help me, they were right. I couldn't remember my old apartment clearly, couldn't remember friends' names or phone numbers. It was like my entire life before Ashwood Lane was fading, becoming insubstantial. "No," I said again, but there was no force behind it. "Yes." They reached out and took my hand. Their touch was ice cold and wrong, and where their skin met mine, I felt something crack. "Let me show you what comes next." The world lurched, the apartment dissolved around us, and suddenly I was standing in that narrow space, that gap between walls. It was even smaller than I had imagined. I had to turn sideways to fit, and even then my chest pressed against one wall while my back touched the other. The only light came from a tiny gap near the floor. Through it I could see into what had been my apartment, see a figure lying in the bed, sleeping peacefully. "That's you," my doppelganger said. They were standing in the space with me, though there shouldn't have been room for both of us. "Or it will be once you accept your place, once you stop fighting." "How long?" I asked. My voice echoed strangely in the confined space. How long was I in here? "Time doesn't work right in the walls. Could be days, could be decades. You'll call out, and sometimes someone will hear you. Sometimes they'll even answer. But they never let you out. They never remember. And eventually you become plural, become all the voices that came before. And then you get to rest, you get to fade, you get to finally stop existing in this horrible in-between space." They pressed their palm against the wall. "All you have to do is wait for the next tenant. Draw them in, count them as they disappear. 1, 2, 3, up to 7, and then you can leave." "I won't do it." "You will, because the alternative is staying here forever, calling out to empty apartments, watching tenant after tenant pass through without hearing you, slowly going mad in the dark." I tried to move, to push past them, to escape this impossible space, but my body wouldn't obey. I was stuck, rooted, becoming part of the wall itself. "Why did you leave me here?" I found myself saying. The words came automatically, pulled from some deep place I didn't control. "Why did you leave me here?" "There it is," my doppelganger said softly. "The first question, the first step toward acceptance." They faded then, dissolving into the shadows, leaving me alone in the narrow space. I don't know how long I stood there. Time lost all meaning in the dark. But eventually I heard movement on the other side of the wall. Someone walking through the apartment. A new tenant, maybe. Someone who will hear my voice and ignore it. Someone who will become me. The cycle continuing forever. I woke up in my bed 3 days later. The sun was streaming through my windows, and my apartment looked normal, lived in. There were dishes in the sink, and dirty clothes on the floor, and all the mundane evidence of a life being lived. I sat up slowly, my head pounding. The last few days were a blur. I remembered the wall, the voice, the doppelganger. But it all felt distant now, like a bad dream fading in the morning light. I got up and went about my day, made coffee, took a shower, got dressed. Everything felt normal. Except small things were wrong. My coffee mug said "World's Best Teacher" on it. I'd never been a teacher. The clothes in my closet were a size too small, or maybe I was a size too large. When I picked up my phone to check messages, the wallpaper was a photo of people I didn't recognize. The contacts list was full of names I'd never heard. I opened my wallet. The driver's license inside had my photo, but a different name. David Whitmore. No, that wasn't right. My name was... I tried to remember, tried to pull up my actual name from the fog in my mind. But it wouldn't come. All I could think was David Whitmore, even though I knew, I was certain that wasn't me. Was it? I stumbled to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. My face stared back at me, but something about it was wrong. The proportions were slightly off, like I was looking at a photograph that had been stretched. As I stared, a second face appeared behind mine in the reflection. My face, but different. Grayer, older, sad. They mouthed words. "Welcome home." I spun around. Nobody there. When I looked back at the mirror, I was alone. Just my reflection. Normal. Unremarkable. I went back to the main room and tried to calm down, tried to think rationally. Maybe I'd had some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was in a dissociative state. There had to be a logical explanation. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. "Hello? Mr. Whitmore?" A man's voice, cheerful and professional. "This is Edgar Garrett. I'm the landlord at 1847 Ashwood Lane. I wanted to follow up about your application for apartment 2A. You're approved, and you can move in this weekend if..." I hung up, stared at the phone. That conversation hadn't happened yet, or had already happened, or... A knock at my door made me jump. I opened it to find the elderly woman from 2C standing there, but she looked different, younger somehow. Or maybe I was just seeing her clearly for the first time. "You're new here," she said. Not a question, a statement. "I guess. I think so." "How long do you think you'll stay?" "I don't know." She nodded slowly. "They never do. But you'll leave eventually. They always leave, and then the counting starts again." She turned and walked back to her apartment, leaving me standing in my doorway trying to make sense of her words. I went back inside and approached the wall, that wall that had started everything. My hand reached out automatically, pressed against the plaster. It was warm now, almost alive, pulsing with a heartbeat I could feel through my palm. And from the other side, faint but unmistakable, I heard a voice. My voice. "Why did you leave me here?" I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned, but the voice continued, growing louder, more insistent. "Why did you leave me here? Why did you leave me here? Why did you leave me here?" I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The voice was inside my head now, echoing in the space between my thoughts. "Stop," I whispered. "Please stop." The voice changed, became softer, almost gentle. "I'm you. You're me. We're all the same. And soon you'll understand. Soon you'll take your place. Soon you'll count to 7, and then you'll be free." I looked around my apartment, at the things that weren't quite mine, at the life that didn't quite fit, and I understood. I was already in the wall. I'd been in the wall the whole time. This apartment, this life, this feeling of normalcy, it was just another layer of the trap. The house giving me the illusion of escape while slowly integrating me into its pattern. The next tenant would move in soon, would hear my voice calling from the walls, would investigate, discover, eventually succumb, and the cycle would continue. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then it would start again. I walked to my front door and tried the knob. It turned. The door opened. I could see the hallway, the stairs, the path to freedom. But I knew that if I walked through that door, I'd just end up back here. That no matter where I went, I'd wake up in this apartment, in this life that wasn't mine, in this body that was becoming less real with every passing hour. The only way out was through the wall, through the counting, through the acceptance. So I closed the door, locked it, and went back to the wall. I pressed my ear against it and listened. 7 voices whispered in the dark, 7 versions of myself trapped and forgotten, calling out to whoever would listen. Soon I'd be the 8th. And then someone new would move into apartment 2A, someone who looked like me, who would make the same choices, who would eventually stand where I was standing and hear their own voice calling from the walls. The pattern was perfect. The pattern was eternal. The pattern was complete. From the wall I heard laughter, my laughter, echoing across time and space and all the thin places where one reality bleeds into another, and I understood that I'd been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't, "Why did you leave me here?" It was, "When will you leave me here?" The answer I was beginning to suspect was soon, very soon. I just had to wait for the next tenant to arrive. I just had to wait for myself to knock on the door and ask about the voice in the walls. I just had to wait. In the darkness, in the narrow space between one wall and another. In the place where all versions of myself converge and separate, and become the same thing, wearing different faces across different years. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. I knew who it was. I knew what they would say. I knew because I'd said it before, in another life, in another version of this endless repeating moment. Why did you leave me here? And somewhere in another apartment, in another time, another version of me would hear those words and begin the investigation that would lead them here. To this wall, to this trap, to this understanding that some patterns can never be broken, only continued. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The count begins again. It always does.